The text message arrived at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, cutting through the thick silence of Naomi Jenkins's South Side Chicago bedroom like a razor. Her 17-year-old son, Jamal, never texted her this late, not unless something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. Her heart, a drum against her ribs, pounded out a frantic rhythm as she fumbled for her phone on the nightstand, her eyes struggling to adjust to the harsh glow of the screen. Her nursing scrubs, still clinging to her tired body from a double shift at a major city hospital, felt heavy, soaked in the day's exhaustion. But the words on the screen vaporized any physical weariness, replacing it with a cold, coiling fear that started in her stomach and snaked its way up her spine. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Can't do this anymore." 3 simple sentences. Yet, in the quiet depth of that pre-dawn hour, they didn't just hint at trouble. They promised to shatter every carefully constructed piece of the world Naomi had built for Jamal, every assumption she held about his safety and happiness. This wasn't the usual teenage angst, the fleeting drama of a high school crush or a dropped class. No, this was something deeper, something that resonated with a fundamental wrongness, a sense of despair that made her blood run cold. She knew her son. 18 years of raising him, mostly on her own since his father left when Jamal was 3, had given her an almost psychic ability to read between the lines of his communications. This was a breaking point. She called him immediately. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked into a silence that screamed louder than any alarm. Straight to voicemail. She tried again, her thumb numbly pressing the redial button, her breath catching in her throat with each unanswered ring. "Jamal, baby, call me back right now," she whispered into the phone, the words catching on a sob she tried to swallow. "Whatever it is, we can handle it together. We always do." The next 3 hours were an agonizing blur. Naomi paced her small apartment, a familiar space that suddenly felt confining, oppressive. The worn floral rug in the living room seemed to mock her anxiety with its cheerful pattern as she walked endless circles. She called Jamal every 15 minutes, a ritual of desperation. She brewed coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, but she couldn't bring herself to drink it. Her mind raced through every possible scenario: a car accident, a fight, trouble with the wrong crowd. But the nature of his text, that chilling "can't do this anymore," pointed to something internal, a secret burden he was carrying. Finally, in a desperate move, she called Aisha Brown, Kalon's mother. It was barely 5 a.m., but Naomi knew Aisha wouldn't mind. Their sons had been inseparable since middle school, like 2 peas in a pod, and the 2 mothers had developed their own deep friendship over years of shared carpools, school fundraisers, and cheering on the boys at basketball games. "Naomi, what's wrong?" Aisha's voice, thick with sleep at first, sharpened instantly with concern. Aisha always had a knack for sensing when something was truly amiss. "Aisha, it's Jamal. He sent me this text saying he can't do this anymore and he won't answer his phone. Imskarat, sis." Really scared. Naomi's voice cracked, and she had to swallow hard to keep from breaking down completely.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
A pause on the other end. "Wait a minute. Kalon's been acting strange too lately. Real quiet. Not himself at all. He's been staying in his room, glued to his phone, barely talking to me. I just figured it was teenage stuff, you know? Boy drama, maybe. You think something happened at school? Like a bully or something?" Riverside High School. The name hung in the air, a place that, until now, had been a beacon of hope for Jamal. Despite the very real challenges of an underfunded public school on Chicago's South Side, the leaky roofs, the outdated textbooks, the overcrowded classrooms, Jamal had not just survived there, he had thrived. He was the captain of the debate team, a natural orator with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit. He maintained a near-perfect 3.8 GPA, a testament to his discipline and innate intelligence. He'd already received early acceptance letters from 3 colleges, each one a tangible piece of the future he'd been so meticulously building. His English teacher, Ms. Brenda Holloway, had been particularly instrumental in his success. She was the one who had seen his raw talent in writing, had stayed after school countless times to help him refine his college essays, and had even penned one of his most glowing recommendation letters. Ms. Holloway. The name brought a wave of comfort, a familiar warmth. She was everything a teacher should be. At 28, she was young enough to relate to her students, speaking their language, understanding their world. But she was also profoundly passionate about literature, about the power of words, and genuinely invested in seeing her kids succeed, not just in the classroom, but in life. She had grown up right here in a similar neighborhood, understood the struggles and the dreams of these kids. She'd gone to a local university, earned her degree, and returned to give back to the very community that had raised her. Parents loved her, praising her dedication at PTA meetings. Administrators praised her, pointing to her innovative teaching methods and her ability to connect with even the most challenging students. And students? They didn't just like her, they respected her in a way that was rare in any school, let alone one grappling with the systemic challenges Riverside faced. Naomi had personally thanked the young teacher numerous times, sending her small gifts of appreciation, utterly grateful for the profoundly positive influence she'd had on her son's life. Ms. Holloway was a blessing, a true godsend. But at 6:30 a.m. that Tuesday morning, when Jamal finally walked through their apartment door, the first rays of Chicago's sun filtering weakly through the blinds, Naomi would learn that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones capable of the greatest, most soul-crushing betrayal. He looked utterly defeated. His usually bright eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, as if he'd been crying for hours. His broad shoulders, which usually carried the confidence of a young man ready to conquer the world, were slumped in an almost childlike defeat. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if each step was a monumental effort. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, raw and broken, a voice Naomi had never heard from him before. They sat at their small kitchen table, the same table where he'd done homework every night since kindergarten, where they'd shared countless dinners, the scent of Naomi's famous jerk chicken still lingering in the wood grain. This was their sanctuary, the place where they talked about his dreams of becoming a lawyer, of changing the world, of making a real difference. Naomi reached across to take his hand, to offer comfort, to bridge the chasm of fear that had opened between them. But he pulled away, gently but firmly, wrapping his arms around himself instead, as if to physically contain the tremor that ran through him. "I don't know how to say this," he began, his gaze fixed on the table's worn, scarred surface, avoiding her eyes. "It's about Ms. Holloway." Naomi felt her stomach drop, a dizzying lurch that made the room swim. Brenda Holloway, the kind, brilliant, dedicated teacher. The woman who had been a pillar of support for Jamal. When he'd struggled with writing during his sophomore year, she'd worked with him one-on-one, patiently, tirelessly, until his words flowed with newfound confidence. When his grandmother, Naomi's own beloved mother, had passed away last spring, Ms. Holloway had not only attended the funeral, her eyes filled with genuine sorrow, but had also helped Jamal channel his grief into a beautiful, poignant essay that had won a district-wide writing contest. Naomi had personally thanked the young teacher numerous times, feeling an almost maternal gratitude for the profoundly positive influence she'd had on her son's life. "What about Ms. Holloway?" Naomi asked, her voice barely a breath, though something in her gut already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. The cold dread that had gripped her since the text message suddenly had a name, a face, and it was one she had admired. Jamal's hands, clasped tightly in front of him, shook visibly as he spoke. The words came slowly at first, haltingly, as if each one was a struggle, a weight too heavy to lift. Then, as if a dam had finally burst, they rushed out in a torrent, tumbling over each other, raw and unedited. "It started last year. I was just 14 then. At first, it was just, she said I was special, that I had potential none of the other students had, that I was intellectually mature beyond my years, a real prodigy in the making. She started keeping me after school, saying she wanted to give me extra help with my college applications, make sure my essays stood out. She offered to connect me with her friends who worked in law, saying I had a mind for it." He recounted the gradual progression, a slow, insidious erosion of boundaries. The lingering touches that lasted too long on his arm or shoulder, ostensibly encouragement, but feeling oddly intimate. The personal compliments that made him uncomfortable, whispers about his deep eyes or strong hands or how handsome he was becoming, compliments that had nothing to do with his academic performance. The way Ms. Holloway began finding reasons to keep him alone in her classroom after everyone else had left, the lights dimmed, the door slightly ajar but offering no true sense of public space. How she'd started texting him from her personal phone number, initially about school assignments, then about increasingly personal topics. His feelings, his dreams, his fears, his relationship with his mother, his absent father. She'd weave in compliments about his emotional depth, how he was different from other boys his age. Jamal swallowed hard, his voice dropping even lower. She even started telling me things about her own life, things that made me feel like I was the only one she could trust. She told me her husband was having an affair with her best friend, and that when he finally left her, she'd get millions of dollars. She'd text me saying she had no intention of marrying that husband of hers for real, that it was just for appearances. It made me feel like I was important to her, like I was her confidant. He paused, a bitter laugh escaping him. She even sent me texts when she was traveling in Italy. I found out later from the police that she was actually getting married there, to that same husband, while she was sending me those messages. She said I was mature for my age, Jamal continued, his voice barely a whisper, thick with shame and a newfound understanding of betrayal. That most people wouldn't understand our connection. That it was a special bond, something rare. His voice cracked on the last word, and Naomi felt her own heart cracking in rhythm with his, a profound ache in her chest for her son, for the innocence he was losing right before her eyes.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
He told her about the day last October, a crisp fall afternoon, when Ms. Holloway had driven him home from a late debate team meeting. Instead of dropping him off at their building, she'd parked around the corner, under the shade of a gnarled oak tree. The street was quiet, the last of the autumn light fading. And then she had leaned over, her hand cupping his cheek, and kissed him. He'd been shocked, frozen, confused by the sudden intimacy, flattered by the attention from someone he admired so deeply, and terrified, a primal, gut-wrenching terror he couldn't articulate at the time. She was his teacher, an adult, someone he respected and trusted implicitly. When he'd tried to pull away, to make sense of what was happening, she'd held him, her grip surprisingly strong. She told him he was special, that what they had was beautiful, a profound connection that transcended age. She'd whispered that age was just a number, that their souls were aligned. Jamal recounted how the abuse intensified. It wasn't just at school anymore. Sometimes she'd arrange for him to come to her home after school, under the guise of extra tutoring or college prep, even when her husband was supposedly there or out. The molestation, he realized now, happened more than 45 times over the course of the year, both in her classroom and inside her house. She always told me to turn off the location sharing features on my phone when we were hooking up, he admitted, his voice barely audible, confirming her deliberate secrecy. I didn't know what to do, Mom, Jamal confessed, tears finally streaming down his face, though he made no sound. She said if I told anyone, I could get in trouble for initiating it. That people would think I was lying, because who would ever believe a student over a teacher? Especially a teacher like her, with her reputation. She said it would ruin my chances for college, that she'd have to retract her recommendation, that everyone would see me as manipulative and dishonest. He even recalled her texting him about her fears. She texted me once, on November 4th of last year, saying a neighbor of hers just got caught for doing the same thing, and now she was scared. But that obviously didn't stop her. The manipulation had continued for months, a relentless, psychological warfare waged against a trusting, ambitious teenager. Ms. Holloway had masterfully used her position of authority, Jamal's deep-seated trust in her, and his fierce dreams of college and a future in law to maintain absolute control over the situation. She'd convinced him that their relationship was consensual, that it was a unique, profound bond, and that he was lucky to have someone who truly understood him, someone who saw his brilliance and depth. She framed his discomfort as typical teenage awkwardness, his attempts to pull away as a fear of something too good or too real. But the previous weekend, everything had changed. Kalon Brown, Jamal's best friend since 7th grade, the quiet, observant one, had revealed that he was experiencing something eerily similar with Ms. Holloway. The two boys had stayed up all night, hunched over their phones, texting each other in frantic, hushed tones, then eventually meeting up in a secluded park at dawn, comparing stories, their disbelief slowly giving way to a horrifying, dawning realization. They weren't alone, and what was happening to them wasn't love or mentorship or a special connection. It was something dark and predatory. It was abuse. Kalon's been going through the same thing, Mom, Jamal choked out, his head finally resting against her shoulder as she pulled him close. And we think there might be others. Naomi's hands trembled as she finally pulled him into an embrace he didn't resist, clutching him tight, inhaling the familiar scent of his hair. Her baby, because that's what he still was, despite his towering height, his deep, resonant voice, and those coveted college acceptance letters, had been carrying this horrific burden alone for months. The guilt crashed over her in suffocating waves, a crushing weight that threatened to buckle her knees. How had she, his mother, his protector, missed the signs? The subtle changes in his behavior, the way he'd grown distant, retreating into himself, the dark circles under his eyes, the nightmares he'd started having but always claimed he couldn't remember in the morning. She had dismissed them, attributed them to the stress of senior year, college applications, the general turbulence of adolescence. "Baby, this is not your fault," she whispered into his hair, the same words she'd repeated when he was small and afraid of the dark, when he'd skinned his knee, when he'd been heartbroken over a lost toy. "None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? She's the adult. She's the teacher. She's the one who betrayed you." But even as she comforted her son, her mind raced, a furious, protective fire igniting within her. Brenda Holloway, the perfect game she had played. She'd built such a sterling, unimpeachable reputation in the community, had woven herself so deeply into the fabric of Riverside High, that any accusation against her would seem utterly impossible, a malicious lie. She'd chosen her victims with chilling precision, bright, ambitious boys from single-parent homes, kids who were hungry for mentorship, for validation, for a pathway to success. She'd isolated them, made them feel uniquely special and chosen, then used their own ambitions, their own vulnerabilities against them. The audacity, the calculated cruelty of it, made Naomi's stomach churn. Over the next few days, the truth continued to unfold like a nightmare that refused to end. Naomi, fueled by a mother's righteous fury and a deep, unshakable love for her son, immediately accompanied Jamal to the local police precinct to report the abuse. Detective Simone Dubois met them in a quiet interview room, her demeanor calm and empathetic. A 20-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department, specializing in cases involving minors, Detective Dubois had seen too many situations like this, too many shattered trusts and stolen innocences. Her eyes, though kind, held a weary understanding that spoke volumes. "Mrs. Jenkins, Jamal, I want you both to know that we're going to investigate this thoroughly, with every resource we have," Detective Dubois assured them, her voice low and steady. "And Jamal, I want you to know that coming forward, speaking your truth like this, took tremendous courage. What you've done is brave, and it's going to help others." The initial police report was just the beginning. The investigation that followed revealed a horrifying pattern of behavior that stretched back 3, possibly even 4 years. Brenda Holloway had cultivated relationships with at least 6 male students, using the exact same insidious techniques with each one. She'd identified vulnerable young men, often from single-parent homes, often high achievers who yearned for extra guidance and validation, boys who saw her as a gateway to their dreams, and had systematically groomed them. She was a master manipulator, weaving a web of dependency and fear that trapped her victims, making them believe they were complicit or even grateful. The community's reaction was explosive and deeply divided, a jagged crack running through the heart of the South Side. Some parents, instantly recognizing the signs of manipulation and betrayal, rallied around the victims and their families, organizing impromptu support groups in church basements and community centers, demanding immediate accountability from the school district and law enforcement. Aisha Brown, Kalon's mother, became a vocal, unwavering leader in this effort, her quiet strength transforming into a fierce, unwavering advocacy. "Our babies are hurting," she declared at a tense community meeting, her voice resonating with a quiet power. "And we ain't gonna stand by and let this woman get away with it, not after all she'd done to our boys." But others, many of them parents whose own children had been taught by Ms. Holloway, or who had volunteered alongside her at school events, simply couldn't believe it. Their beloved Ms. Holloway, the one who coached the poetry slam team, who organized the food drives, who stayed late tutoring students for free, could she truly be capable of such predatory behavior? "She taught my daughter," one mother cried, tears in her eyes at a school board meeting. "She was so kind, so dedicated. It just doesn't make sense." The disbelief, fueled by Holloway's carefully constructed facade, added another layer of pain and frustration for the victims and their families. It felt like they weren't just fighting for justice, but for their truth to be believed in the first place. "It's always the ones you least suspect, ain't it?" Aisha Brown said during one of the packed support group meetings, her voice heavy with sorrow and anger. The room, usually used for Sunday school, was filled with mothers, fathers, and a few community elders, their faces etched with concern. "That's what makes it so evil. She used our trust, our faith in our educators against our kids. She knew exactly what she was doing." The raw emotion in the room was palpable, a shared grief and a growing resolve.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
The legal proceedings, as they always do in complex cases involving minors and sexual abuse, moved slowly, painstakingly. Brenda Holloway was arrested and charged with 55 counts in total, including 20 counts each of criminal sexual assault and aggravated sexual abuse, and multiple counts of grooming and exploitation of a minor. Her attorney, a slick, expensive lawyer from downtown, Reginald Hayes, immediately began building a defense that portrayed her as a dedicated, but perhaps overly enthusiastic teacher who had made poor judgment calls, but certainly hadn't committed crimes. "These young men are nearly adults," her lawyer argued during a preliminary hearing, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a case of inappropriate relationships, perhaps, but not criminal behavior. Boys will be boys, and sometimes they misunderstand a teacher's genuine care and mentorship." The audacity of the implication, that Jamal and the others were somehow complicit or misinterpreting, made Naomi's blood boil. But the evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of truth against Holloway's flimsy denials. Several hundred, if not 1,000, text messages recovered from the boys' phones and Holloway's own laid bare the intimate, inappropriate nature of their communications, detailing her elaborate grooming tactics. Witness testimony from other students who had observed Ms. Holloway's unnervingly close interactions with the boys, and even a few staff members who had found her behavior subtly odd, but hadn't known how to articulate their unease. Most damning of all, the consistent, almost identical patterns of grooming described by multiple victims painted a clear, undeniable picture of deliberate, calculated predatory conduct. The most heartbreaking revelation came when investigators discovered Ms. Holloway's personal journal during a search of her meticulously kept apartment. The entries, written in neat, flowing script, were not the musings of a passionate educator. Instead, they revealed the chillingly calculated nature of her abuse. She described her victims in clinical, almost scientific terms, detailing her methods for identifying their vulnerabilities and maintaining control over them. Jay is responding well to the individual attention. One entry read, making Naomi gasp aloud in the courtroom, a raw, involuntary sound of pain. His mother works nights, so there are more opportunities for contact. He's hungry for approval, probably from growing up without a father figure. This makes him ideal for the kind of mentorship I can provide. He seeks validation easily. Another entry about Kalon spoke of his quiet nature. Kay is more withdrawn, needs gentle persuasion, emphasize his unique artistic talent. He craves recognition for his creativity. A subtle touch, a shared secret about his brilliance will draw him in. Prosecutor Nia Washington also presented a horrifying piece of evidence, a video Ms. Holloway had allegedly sent to Jamal. The prosecutor said that when she couldn't physically abuse him, she would send him little reminders such as pictures and videos of herself, including one where she was masturbating while saying his name, Nia Washington stated to a hushed courtroom. She sent him numerous videos and photos, and even asked that he do the same in return. This graphic detail solidified the predatory nature of Holloway's actions, turning stomachs and hardening resolve. Naomi had to leave the courtroom when those passages were read aloud and the video's contents described, the words echoing in her mind, a cold, clinical analysis of her son's deepest insecurities. The calculated coldness with which Holloway had analyzed and exploited her son's vulnerabilities, turning his very strengths and needs against him, was more than any mother should have to hear. It was a violation not just of Jamal, but of her own deepest love and trust. Throughout the agonizingly slow legal proceedings, the community grappled with questions that had no easy answers, questions that haunted their sleep and echoed in every conversation on the block. How had Holloway's behavior gone unnoticed for so long, right under everyone's noses? What systemic failures within the school administration, within the very fabric of their trusted institutions, had allowed a predator to operate freely, cloaked in the mantle of respectability? How could they, as parents and a community, protect their children from someone who was supposed to be protecting them, nurturing them? Principal David Owens, a man who had dedicated 15 years of his life to Riverside High, struggled visibly with his own immense guilt. His face, usually jovial and welcoming, was now perpetually etched with worry. "I recommended her for Teacher of the Year," he confessed, his voice hoarse, during a heated emergency meeting of the school board. "She fooled all of us. She was a master at presenting exactly what we wanted to see. But that's not an excuse. We failed these children, and we have to do better. We must do better for our kids. In the wake of the revelations, the school district, under immense pressure from the community and the media, implemented new, sweeping policies. Mandatory reporting training for all staff, from janitors to administrative assistants, was put in place. Revised, more stringent background check procedures were enacted, extending beyond simple criminal records to include checks of professional conduct and previous employment references. Clearer, non-negotiable guidelines about appropriate teacher-student interactions were drawn up, explicitly stating boundaries that had previously been vague. But for the families affected, for Naomi and Aisha and the other mothers and fathers, these changes, though necessary, felt like too little too late. The wounds were already deep, the trust irrevocably shattered. Jamal's healing process was complicated, a winding, non-linear road with unexpected turns and sudden drops. Some days, he seemed like his old self, cracking jokes with Kalon, his laughter ringing out, getting excited about college plans, talking about his future with the familiar passion that had always defined him. He'd even started drawing again, a hobby he'd abandoned during the height of the abuse, his sketches now filled with vibrant colors and bold lines. Other days, though, the immense weight of what he'd experienced would crash down on him, leaving him withdrawn, sullen, and filled with a quiet, simmering anger. He'd retreat into his room, the sounds of his music muffling any attempts at conversation. "I keep thinking about all the ways I could have stopped it," he told the therapist, Dr. Renee Harrison, Naomi had found for him, a warm, insightful Black woman who specialized in trauma therapy for adolescents and understood the nuances of their community. "If I had just said no more firmly, if I had told someone sooner, if I hadn't responded to her texts. I just kept hoping it would stop, or that I was imagining things." Dr. Harrison, her voice gentle but firm, helped Jamal understand that self-blame was a common, almost inevitable response to abuse, especially when the abuser was someone in a position of trust. "Jamal, adults are responsible for maintaining appropriate boundaries with minors," she explained patiently. "That responsibility never, ever falls on the child or teenager, no matter how mature they are. Ms. Holloway held all the power, and she abused it. That is her fault, and hers alone. Your job was to be a student, to trust. Her job was to teach and to protect. She failed. You didn't." The therapy sessions also helped Naomi process her own complex, warring emotions. The gnawing guilt of not recognizing what was happening to her son, of missing the subtle shifts in his demeanor, warred fiercely with a consuming rage at the woman who had so cruelly violated his trust, his innocence, his very being. The immense pride she felt in Jamal's incredible courage to come forward mixed with a profound heartbreak over the innocence he'd lost too soon. Dr. Harrison reminded Naomi that she, too, was a victim of Ms. Holloway's manipulation, her trust in a fellow Black woman, an educator, having been betrayed just as deeply as Jamal's.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
As the legal case progressed, more devastating details emerged about Holloway's sophisticated manipulation tactics. She had been careful to establish herself as utterly indispensable to her victims' futures, dangling their dreams like bait. She'd offered to write glowing recommendation letters that guaranteed college admission, provided extra tutoring that bled into inappropriate contact, and boasted about making connections with college admissions officers through her alumni network. The boys felt utterly trapped. Speaking out might jeopardize their entire educational future, the very pathways to success they'd worked so hard for. But staying silent meant enduring continued abuse, a quiet hell that slowly chipped away at their spirits. Aisha Brown, Kalon's mother, became an even more fierce and tireless advocate for all the affected families. She didn't just organize support groups. She connected families with legal aid, with trauma counselors, with community leaders who could amplify their voices. She pushed relentlessly for concrete policy changes at the school district level, making sure that what happened to their boys would never happen again. Her voice, once quiet, now boomed with conviction at every public forum. "Our kids were targeted because they were ambitious, because they were good students, because they trusted their teachers, trusted the system," she declared during a televised community forum, her eyes blazing with determined anger. "We as parents, as a community, need to make sure this never, ever happens again. We need to be the generation that stands up and says, 'No more.'" for our children and for all children." Her words resonated deeply with the largely African-American audience, who knew all too well the historical struggles for justice and protection within their communities. The trial began 8 months after Jamal first came forward, a date that felt both like an eternity and a blink of an eye. The courtroom was packed each day, a sea of faces from the South Side community. Some were there to support the victims and their families, their faces grim but resolute. Others, still struggling to reconcile the charges with the image of their beloved teacher, sat in stunned disbelief, whispering prayers and doubts. Prosecutor Nia Washington, a sharp, no-nonsense black woman known for her meticulous preparation, methodically presented the evidence. She built a case that showed Brenda Holloway's behavior was not a series of unfortunate mistakes or misinterpretations, but a deliberate, calculated pattern of predatory conduct. The extensive trove of text messages, the compelling witness testimony, and most damningly, Holloway's own chilling journal entries, painted a stark, undeniable picture of a woman who had systematically identified, groomed, and abused vulnerable teenagers. The defendant didn't stumble into inappropriate relationships, Washington argued during her opening statement, her voice clear and resonant, filling the hushed courtroom. She hunted for victims. She studied them, learned their vulnerabilities, their deepest longings for mentorship and approval. And she exploited those vulnerabilities meticulously, ruthlessly, for her own gratification. This was not a lapse in judgment, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. This was a calculated, insidious betrayal of trust. The defense team, led by attorney Reginald Hayes, a smooth, charismatic lawyer known for his aggressive tactics, attempted to portray Holloway as a dedicated, selfless teacher who had merely crossed some boundaries in her zealous efforts to mentor her students. They pointed to her stellar academic record, her extensive community involvement, and brought in a parade of character witnesses, fellow teachers, parents whose children had not been victimized, even some former students, who testified to her dedication, her passion for education, and her unwavering commitment to her students' success. They argued that the boys were perhaps fabricating or exaggerating their stories for attention or out of resentment. But the prosecution's case was overwhelming, a fortress of truth that could not be breached. 6 young men, one by one, took the stand, each describing their horrific experiences with Holloway. Their individual stories, though deeply personal, converged to reveal a chillingly consistent pattern of behavior that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence or misunderstanding. They spoke of the same compliments, the same private tutoring sessions that turned sinister, the same veiled threats about their college futures if they spoke out. When Jamal took the stand, Naomi held her breath, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her son had grown so much over the past months, not just physically, his frame now broader, more mature, but emotionally. The scared, confused boy who had sat at their kitchen table that Tuesday morning had transformed into a young man imbued with a quiet strength, willing to face his abuser in court, to speak his truth for himself and for others. He wore a crisp white shirt, his hair neatly faded, and he carried himself with a new, somber dignity. "She made me feel like I was special," Jamal testified, his voice steady despite the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. He looked directly at the jury, his eyes clear and resolute. "Like I was different from other students, more mature, more intelligent. But I realize now that she said the same things to other boys. We weren't special to her. We were just targets. She preyed on our desire to succeed, on our trust in her." He spoke about the psychological toll, the isolation, the fear. "It felt like I was living a double life. The Jamal everyone saw at school, captain of the debate team, chasing his dreams. And the other Jamal, who carried this secret, this shame, feeling like I had no one to tell, no way out." He then spoke of the graphic demands. "She even sent me videos of herself masturbating while saying my name, and asked me to do the same in return. It was disgusting, but I was so scared, so confused, I didn't know how to say no." The courtroom was visibly shaken by his raw honesty. The most powerful moment came when Kalon Brown took the stand. The two best friends, linked by this shared trauma, had supported each other throughout the investigation and trial, their bond forged even deeper in the fires of betrayal. But seeing them both on the witness stand, young men who should have been worried about prom dates and college applications, about pickup basketball games and late-night study sessions, instead of testifying about sexual abuse, broke the hearts of everyone in the courtroom, leaving many in tears. "I looked up to her," Kalon said when asked about his relationship with Holloway, his voice softer than Jamal's, but filled with a quiet, profound pain. She was everything I thought a teacher should be. Smart, caring, interested in helping us succeed, pushing us to be our best. When she started paying special attention to me, inviting me to stay after, complimenting my writing, I felt proud. I thought I had earned it somehow. I thought she truly saw something special in me. I didn't realize until much later that I hadn't earned anything. I had just become her next victim. It makes you question everything, you know? Like, who can you really trust? The defense's cross-examination was aggressive, attempts to discredit the young men. Reginald Hayes, Holloway's attorney, tried to paint the young men as willing participants, or as attention-seeking adolescents who had misunderstood the nature of their relationships with Holloway, suggesting they were fabricating or exaggerating for notoriety. He grilled them on inconsistencies in their recollections, on why they didn't report sooner, on details of their texts, trying to imply flirtation on their part. But the boys' testimony remained consistent in its core truths, their pain clearly genuine, and their courage in coming forward undeniable. Their quiet dignity and unwavering resolve shone through the grueling questioning. Dr. Imani Jones, an expert in adolescent psychology and sexual abuse, testified eloquently about the dynamics of teacher-student relationships and the inherent power imbalances that make true consent impossible between adults and minors, especially in educational settings. She meticulously explained the grooming process, how predators identify vulnerabilities, build trust, and then exploit it. Teenagers are still developing their understanding of appropriate relationships, boundaries, and their own agency. Dr. Jones explained to the jury, her voice authoritative. When an adult in a position of authority, like a beloved teacher, initiates inappropriate contact, the teenager cannot truly consent, regardless of their chronological age or apparent maturity. Their developmental stage, coupled with the immense power differential, removes the possibility of genuine consent. The adult, in such a situation, is always the one responsible for upholding the ethical and legal boundaries. Her testimony was a crucial counterpoint to the defense's attempts to shift blame to the victims. The trial lasted 3 intense, emotionally draining weeks. Each day, Naomi watched her son and the other young men face their abuser with increasing confidence, their initial fear giving way to a shared sense of purpose. They had been violated and manipulated, but they were not broken. They were survivors, and their collective strength in speaking truth to power was nothing short of inspiring. Naomi saw not just her son, but a new generation of advocates standing tall. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent, thick with anticipation, except for the quiet click of the judge's gavel. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by the soft sound of crying. Some tears of profound relief, others of continued disbelief from those who still couldn't reconcile the conviction with the woman they thought they knew. Brenda Holloway was found guilty on all counts. 55 counts in total, including 20 counts of criminal sexual assault, 20 counts of aggravated sexual abuse, and multiple counts of grooming and sexual exploitation of a minor.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Judge Diane Ellis's sentencing remarks were scathing, delivered with a gravitas that commanded absolute silence. Her voice, usually calm, vibrated with barely contained outrage. Ms. Holloway, you held a position of sacred trust and immense authority over these young men. You were not merely their teacher. You were a mentor, a guide, a beacon of hope in a community that invests deeply in its children's future. You were supposed to nurture their minds, to help them achieve their potential, to protect them. Instead, you systematically exploited their trust, their ambitions, and their vulnerabilities for your own depraved gratification. Your actions have caused immeasurable, lasting harm, not just to these 6 victims, to whom you owed every ethical and moral obligation, but to their families, to the integrity of our educational system, and to the entire community that placed its faith in you. Holloway was sentenced to 35 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 20 years. She would also be required to register as a sex offender upon her eventual release, and would be permanently banned from working in any capacity with minors. As the judge read the sentence, her voice ringing with finality, Naomi watched Holloway's face for any sign of remorse, any flicker of acknowledgement of the immense harm she had caused. But the woman who had once seemed so caring, so dedicated, showed nothing but cold, blank indifference, even as the victims and their families wept tears of profound relief behind her. There was no apology, no sign of contrition, just a chilling void where humanity should have been. Outside the courthouse, the families gathered for a final, emotional press conference. Jamal, now 18 and set to attend Howard University in the fall, stood tall, composed, and spoke on behalf of all the victims. "We want other kids to know that if someone in authority, anyone, is making you uncomfortable, even if they're telling you that you're special, or that you want it, or that you're the only one who truly understands them, you should tell someone you trust," he said, his mother standing proudly beside him, her hand resting lightly on his back, a silent testament to their unbreakable bond. "Tell a parent, an auntie, a counselor, a pastor, another teacher. Anyone. And we want adults to know that they need to listen, truly listen, when kids try to tell them something is wrong, even if it seems impossible, even if it challenges everything you thought you knew about someone. Believe them. Support them. Because silence is a predator's greatest weapon." The aftermath of the trial brought both a profound sense of closure and the continued, often arduous, process of healing. The school district, shamed by the revelations, implemented comprehensive reforms. Independent oversight of teacher-student interactions, mandatory trauma-informed training for all staff to better identify and respond to signs of abuse, and clearer protocols for investigating allegations within schools. A scholarship fund, established in honor of the victims, began providing educational opportunities for other students who had overcome trauma, a beacon of hope born from pain. But perhaps most importantly, the case sparked broader, deeper conversations within the South Side community and beyond about power dynamics in educational settings, the insidious nature of grooming, and the absolute necessity for communities to believe and support victims of abuse, even when the perpetrator seems unlikely, even when they wear a mask of respectability. It challenged people to look past surface appearances and trust their instincts. Jamal thrived at Howard, his intellectual curiosity reignited, his passion for justice more focused than ever. He studied pre-law, with clear plans to specialize in victims' rights advocacy, ensuring that others would not have to fight as hard for their truth to be heard. Kalon, true to his gentle nature, chose a different path, enrolling in a teacher education program. His goal, to become the kind of educator he wished he'd had, someone who truly protected and nurtured students, someone who saw the quiet ones, the vulnerable ones, and stood as their shield. "I want to be the teacher who notices when something's wrong," he explained during his college application interview, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "I want to be the adult who listens, who believes, and who acts when kids try to tell us they need help. Because sometimes, just one adult believing you can change everything." The other victims, too, found their paths forward, each navigating their healing in their own way. Some chose careers in social work, driven by a desire to help others heal. Others pursued law enforcement, determined to bring perpetrators to justice. Still others found their calling in completely different fields, but all of them carried with them the profound knowledge that they had survived something terrible and had found the courage to speak truth, even when it was difficult, painful, and terrifying. 2 years after the trial, Naomi received a letter from one of the other mothers, a poignant update. Her son, one of the younger victims, had just graduated valedictorian from his high school class and would be attending Morehouse College in the fall. "He told me yesterday that he's proud of what they all did," the letter read, the words blurring through Naomi's tears. "He said they didn't just get justice for themselves, they protected other kids who might have become victims if Brenda Holloway had continued teaching. That's how he's chosen to think about it, as a way to honor their courage, and it's truly helping him heal. They turned their pain into purpose." The case also led to significant legislative changes at the state level, a direct result of the relentless advocacy by Naomi, Aisha, and countless others. New laws were enacted requiring more stringent background checks for educators, including regular psychological evaluations and clearer, mandatory protocols for investigating all allegations of abuse within schools, regardless of the accused reputation. The Holloway Act, as it became known in the media and in legal circles, established independent oversight bodies for investigating claims against school personnel, ensuring transparency and accountability, and created stronger whistleblower protections for students and staff who reported inappropriate behavior. Brenda Holloway's name became synonymous with the ultimate betrayal of educational trust, a chilling cautionary tale. But the names of her victims, Jamal, Kalon, and the others, became symbols of incredible courage, resilience, and the power of truth. Their willingness to come forward, to face their abuser in court, and to share their stories publicly had not just secured their own justice, but had created lasting, systemic change that would protect future generations of students for years to come. On a warm Thursday evening in June, exactly 3 years after Jamal first sent that desperate text message to his mother, the Jenkins family hosted a barbecue in their small but vibrant backyard. The air was thick with the scent of grilling chicken and Naomi's famous sweet potato pie. All 6 victims and their families gathered, their laughter and chatter filling the evening air. They were there to celebrate not just Jamal's college graduation, a monumental milestone, but their collective journey, from victims to survivors to powerful, unwavering advocates. As the sun, a fiery orange orb, began to dip below the Chicago skyline, casting long, purple shadows across the neighborhood, Naomi watched her son. He was laughing, truly laughing, with his friends, young men who had endured something no child should ever face, but who had found strength and solace in each other, and in the unwavering belief that truth would ultimately prevail. They had been targeted because they were special, because they were ambitious, because they trusted their teachers. But they had survived because they were also brave, because they had supportive families who believed them, and because they refused to let one person's evil define their futures. "You know what I learned from all this, Mom?" Jamal asked, his voice thoughtful, as they cleaned up the last of the paper plates and napkins after the gathering, the sounds of his friends still lingering from the street. "I learned that the strongest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary, because that's when it matters most." Naomi hugged her son, her brilliant, courageous, resilient son, hugging him tighter than she had in years, feeling the comforting strength of his young adult body. She felt a deep, profound sense of pride mixed with sorrow for the innocence he'd lost, but overwhelmingly, an immense gratitude for the remarkable man he had become. Justice had been served, not just in the cold, stark confines of the courtroom, but in the vibrant, purposeful lives these young men had chosen to build in the aftermath of trauma. The story of Brenda Holloway and her victims serves as a stark, undeniable reminder that predators often hide behind positions of trust and authority, cloaking their true nature in respectability. But it also demonstrates, with undeniable power, the strength of speaking truth, the profound importance of believing survivors, and the indomitable resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable betrayal.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
For every family affected by abuse, for every community grappling with the painful reality that sometimes the people we trust most are capable of great harm, and for every survivor still finding the courage to speak their truth, this story stands as proof that justice is possible, healing is achievable, and that the unwavering courage of young people to speak up can create profound, lasting change that protects countless others. If this story has moved you, if you believe in the power of truth-telling and the paramount importance of protecting our children, show your support by engaging with content that amplifies survivors' voices and advocates for stronger protections in our schools and communities. Like and subscribe to stay informed about stories that matter, cases that demand justice, and the ongoing, vital work of building safer spaces for our children to learn and grow, to dream and thrive. Because when we stand together, when we listen to survivors, and when we demand accountability from those in positions of power, we create a world where predators cannot hide behind their reputations and where justice truly prevails.